Good evening and welcome, everybody. Nice to be with you. I hope that everybody is doing all right midway through this week. I officiated a funeral today for a sweet man and lovely family that actually was very uplifting, if I can say that. His wife and he, who were married for 55 and a half years, sang in a lot of temple choirs together, and that was their thing. They also performed together, and she organized her choir to show up to the funeral, and she's actually the conductor, and she conducted at the funeral the choir singing a beautiful rendition that I'd never heard before of Ose Shalom. It was really pretty remarkable to see this woman paying tribute to her partner of more than half a century in a way that mattered deeply in the context of their relationship. So I actually found that very uplifting this afternoon, and it has been a little rainy here in Orange County, and it started to downpour as we were making our way from the chapel over to Graveside. And then we got situated, and the sun came out. And while I don't really believe that God operates in a way of providing good weather to nice people, I'll take it. I'll take it as a little smile from up above, and that was really very nice. So I'm in kind of a reflective place, as I often am when finishing doing stuff that's about life and death. But overall, feeling quite grateful and very glad to be with all of you. I know there are, it's a changing cast of characters who can be here on a Wednesday night. Some of you have been here every single one. Some of you tune into the recordings and join when you can. I see Michelle. I think this is your first that you've been able to make in person. And glad, well, in person, in Zoom, whatever it is. There are some folks who haven't seen in a few weeks, and glad to see you back. Just grateful for the opportunity to learn together and share Torah and spend time with good old AJ Heschel, who I am finding is making his way into my thinking in all sorts of unexpected ways. This weekly time spent with him is spilling over nicely. So I hope you're finding some of that too. I'd love to dive right in to our material tonight. We're going to look at another section from the essay that we've been making our way through, What Manner of Man is the Prophet, where we've been talking about the prophetic personality and this character that Heschel describes as deeply out of sync with the society in which they live, a sort of perpetual malcontent, a maladjusted personality, but from that place, able to reflect back to the people around them a moral message that the prophet at least says God says they need to hear. And we've talked about the cost of being a prophet, the social cost of being a prophet, that telling people what they need to hear is rarely met with hugs and thank yous. We all know that in our own life. The people who can look at us in the eye and be honest with us, we are grateful for, but it still stings in the moment, no matter how much meant with love. And we talked about also last session, interestingly, the balancing act between the prophet's almost impossibly high moral standards, their demands for a level of perfection that seems beyond our regular experience. And on the one hand, needing to recognize that we are not ourselves prophets or children of the prophets, as the traditional line goes. We can't live, most of us at least, in sync with the prophet's highest demands of us. And so they are always going to leave us with a sense of guilty conscience. And that just has to be okay. We have to be able um, to somehow hold their critique and not become so broken by the ways in which we will inevitably fall short that we can't function. And on the other hand, we need to resist as much as we possibly can going numb to the prophet's message. Because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth listening to. In fact, it means it's really worth listening to, even if we know we can't fully live up to the prophet's demands of us. And so, how do we hold that dual consciousness of we are only human, and also we have this opportunity as humans to be almost close to the angels, and let's get as close as we possibly can. I want to look at Heschel's section that's called Iconoclasm, which is a specific critique of religion and talking about the way in which religion can be a cover for all sorts of nefarious behavior. We know well that religion can be weaponized in all sorts of ways, and that religion can be utilized in order to harm others. Religion can also be utilized in order to distract ourselves maybe from what's really important with a sense of sort of pious behaviorism. And we also believe, I think, because we choose to gather and study these texts, that religion doesn't have to be that way, that religion can be a source of uplift and conscience and a call to a moral audacity that and a spiritual grandeur that Heschel described in that telegram to JFK. And so it's important to be able to critique this religious system that we function within, but to critique it with love, to critique it with a sense that it has within it foibles, but also the possibility to make us the best version of ourselves. I'm going to turn us to the text. We're going to look at a couple of different things. So I'm looking at this section called an iconoclast. The prophet is an iconoclast, challenging the apparently holy, revered, and awesome. Beliefs cherished as certainties, institutions endowed with supreme sanctity, he exposes as scandalous pretensions. Let's just start with those first two sentences. The prophet is an iconoclast. What is an iconoclast? How do you understand the term iconoclast? You can write in chat. You could hop on in. How do you understand that word? We're on page 10. Yeah, Howard. What's an iconoclast?
Somebody who goes around breaking icons, meaning literally it means breaking icons. So things that are accepted, things that are revered, things that are taken as touchstones of the way people think about things and the way people do things in a society. This person tries to either expose as being as having major problems or inconsistencies or internal contradictions that will end up destroying society if they're not broken down.
So an iconoclast
In
literally,
some sense, Trump, for example, is an iconoclast.
certainly
Believe it or not.
breaking
I mean, I know
down
that's odd.
ways that people thought things ran. This is a significant challenge to entrenched systems, right? Iconoclasm does not necessarily come from one side of the political spectrum or the other, one side of the religious spectrum or another. It is about overturning the way it is and the way everybody says it needs to be. And literally, iconoclasm comes from this concept of a breaker of icons, a smasher of idols. And idols can be statues that people bow down to, but idols much more commonly are anything that we invest with ultimate value that is not of ultimate value, something that we hold up as the way things need to be or as an essential good rather than a means to an essential good. So an iconoclast breaks things down. Um, Joel says someone who is outside of the norm, an outlier. Tilda says one who holds an extreme perspective which is incompatible with general group norms, which they hold most strongly, mostly positive. We tend to use the term iconoclast, at least in our culture, to mean that's a good thing, right? It's somebody who we look up to for their iconoclasm. But one could imagine a society much more ordered on compliance and obedience and tradition that might see being an iconoclast as something very negative, an uprooter of sacred things, a perverter of the social order. Joseph says, Abraham, the original icon smasher. And so I would like us to take a look at that story of Abraham that many of us have heard in one version or another, but maybe few of us have actually spent time studying. Um, so this story is a story that a whole world of Jews believe can be found in the Torah. Many Jews believe that this is the origin story for Abraham that we read in the book of Genesis, because it is taught commonly in Hebrew schools, and it fills in a crucial gap which exists in the Torah, which is that we don't have any reason why Abraham gets selected to be the father of monotheism. All we get is a genealogy that tells us how we got to Abraham, and then an announcement out of heaven that Abraham is to go and take his wife and his everything that's his and go on a journey to a new land and build a new people. And the obvious question of what makes Abraham worthy, or why would Abraham listen to such a voice, is left. The Torah is quiet on that question. And so the Midrash, the rabbinic legend making machine, moves in with many different versions of the story of how Abraham got to be Abraham. And this is just one of them, though it is certainly one of the most famous. This version comes from a collection of Midrashim called Tana de Eliyahu from around the year 1000 of the Common Era, but probably is older than that. And let's read it and talk about it together. Abraham's family used to make and sell idols in the market. One day, Abraham's turn came to sell, and his father gave him a basket of household gods and told him to set them up in the marketplace. A man came and asked, "Have you a god to sell?" And Abraham replied, "What kind of god do you wish to buy?" The man said, "I am a mighty man. Give me a god as mighty as I am." So Abraham took an image that was on the highest shelf and said, "Take this one. The one who sits on the highest shelf must be the mightiest of them." As the man was about to leave, Abraham asked, "How old are you?" And the man answered, 70 years. Abraham replied, "Woe to a man of 70 who bows down before something made just today." A woman came carrying a bowl of fine flour and said, "Here, offer it to the gods." At that, Abraham seized a stick, smashed all of the images, and placed the stick in the hands of the biggest one. When his father came, he said, "Who did this to all the gods?" And Abraham answered, "Would I hide anything from my father?" A woman came with a bowl of flour and said, "Here, offer it to them." When I offered it, one god said, "I will eat it first." And the other said, "No, I will eat it first." Then the biggest of them rose up and smashed all the others. His father replied, "Are you mocking me? They can't do anything." Abraham answered, "It is you who say they cannot. Let your ears hear what your mouth is saying." That's a snappy reply back to the father. You just said they're good for nothing? Well, listen, you got it right. They're good for nothing. Let's talk about Abraham the iconoclast for a little while. We've been talking about the prophets who come a thousand years after this history. But even the prophets have a lineage. And if their lineage goes back to Abraham Avinu, to Abraham our father, to this original iconoclast, helpful to know a little bit of his story and what it means to have a people who tell themselves that their foundational birth narrative is a narrative of iconoclasm. That where do we come from? We came from idol smashing. Let's talk about this. Why do you think that Jews told this story? What function does this story have in being created about Father Abraham? Yeah, Joseph.
Well, I think that a study of Jewish history reveals that frequently throughout the ages, Jews challenged existing systems, sort of took an outside the box approach to um, traditions and procedures and business practices, etc. So I think that the self conception of the Jewish people as being that lends itself to iconoclasm. So, to my mind, it was sort of, you know, creating a story consistent with who we are, how we see ourselves.
As a people, thank you. As a people who have dwelt at the margins, and we're going to read in the Megillah in, 24 hours, a people who dwells apart is what Haman says about us. There's a people who dwells apart, who is different than the other good people of Shushan. And Haman draws the conclusion that that means that it's not in the king's interest to tolerate this people who dwells apart. And many other um, totalitarians over the course of history have drawn a similar conclusion that say the people who dwell at the edges are necessarily dangerous, and it is not in our interest to tolerate such edge people. But it seems Jews have taken that liability as a badge of honor, by and large. To be at the edges is to have a perspective that one maybe can't get in the center. And so maybe some of what Joseph is suggesting to us is, okay, if this has always been who we are, if we've always been edge people, then we tell a story about ourselves from the beginning as this is an identity that even if it was placed on us externally, we're going to own by telling this story. Am I getting that right, Joe?
Yes.
Great. Yeah. I see there's some stuff going on in the chat. Please also hop in with voices. Tilda says, for a people who identify as having been chosen by the divine, we sure are not very deferential to divinity. Right? So we choose to identify with the angel wrestler and the god smasher. These sound like Tolkien trolls, right? God smasher, angel wrestler, right? These are interesting folk heroes to choose, and they do say something about a particular communal personality type that makes the Jews, let me tell you, difficult to manage. It's really hard to lead a community of iconoclasts. I was talking with a friend who is a pastor of a very, very big church, and he told me how many members he has at his church. And I said, we have about a tenth of that number in our synagogue, but please keep in mind, my people are Jews, so they each count for 10. And so we have roughly similar sorts of populations. Yeah, this iconoclastic personality structure is part of what makes Jews truly frustrating to lead, but also the delights that we all love. Yeah, Aaron, please.
I think like reading through that story and hearing Abraham say like, "You're a 7-year-old man and you're bowing down to this statue." We almost have this like audacity, this chutzpah to say humans are so important, that we are important, and I think in a lot of stories of polytheistic gods, the gods are so busy and humans are these little, like, we don't care about what's going on with humans. And here Abraham's kind of saying like no, you are more important than this statue. And I think there's, like I said, kind of a, a chutzpah to that, to saying we have value.
Heschel's first published work is a collection, beautiful, Aaron, is a collection of Yiddish poems called Hashem HaMeforash de Mensch, which means the unpronounceable, unspeakable name of God is man. That was his first collection of poems. This idea that the Jewish conception of humans being made in the image of God tells us something about ourselves, but also tells us something about our similarity, our fundamental, not complete otherness from divinity. And so there is a real privileging of the human, and there's something sacred about being human. Yeah, thanks. Tanya wrote, if we are made in the image of God, does that mean our God is also an iconoclast? Certainly a challenger of norms, a disruptive God who issues a moral challenge and a standard to live up to that is iconoclastic. There's a lot of ways in which being a person who takes seriously the concept of loving your neighbor or pursuing justice is a person who is going to be out of step with a society that does not do those things so well. Yeah, please, Howard again.
I think also it has to do with explaining why Abraham could hear God the first time that God talks to him. Because he was already looking for, he could already see the problems, the contradictions, and the things that didn't make sense about idols.
Mm.
And so it's like creativity favors the prepared mind kind of thing, or it's people who already see what the problem is that get the flashes of insight as to what the solution might be.
And those who are adjusted to simply the way things are very unlikely to see the novel way that they could be.
Right.
Abraham's state of maladjustment to his society makes him potentially receptive to a new way of being. The prophets' maladjustment to their society makes them potentially receptive to the message of God. Heschel's maladjustment to his society makes him capable of calling us to a level of spiritual action. It's that it all seems to come back to this: don't adjust too much. Don't come to see the world around you as the way things have to stay. Because if we do, we lose the possibility of something more. Chuck said, "Is it Abraham's solution or God's solution? In other words, might Abraham not only be the messenger, not the creator?" Sure, at this point, we're not getting any message in this story. We're not getting Abraham delivering a message to us. We're simply getting some backstory of how Abraham started to become receptive. I think, as Howard was saying, to become receptive to a different sort of a possibility that it turns out from an early age was not so taken in by the idolatries of his age, an iconoclast. Yeah. Mimi says we need to be open to the various possibilities in our lives and how. And how. Let's turn back to Heschel. Unless there's anything else anybody wants to say about this midrash. So the prophet is an iconoclast, challenging the apparently holy, revered, and awesome. Beliefs cherished as certainties, institutions endowed with supreme sanctity, he exposes as scandalous pretensions. To many a devout believer, Jeremiah's words must have sounded blasphemous. And here's the quote from Jeremiah. To what purpose does frankincense come to me from Sheba, or sweet cane from a distant land? Your burnt offerings are not acceptable, nor your sacrifices pleasing to me. So what is the mode of worship in Jeremiah's day for the first 1,000 years of Jewish civilization? The mode of worship is a commanded set of sacrifices being offered in a holy place, first being offered in the traveling Mishkan, the traveling sanctuary in the desert, then being offered at cultic sites spread out around the land of Israel, and then centralized into an official temple with an official priesthood. The history of early Israel is a history of a loose confederation moving toward unification, a collection of tribes that come to think of themselves as a nation, a collection of sacred sites that ultimately become subsumed in one building, in one place, in one under one authorized leadership. And along comes Jeremiah, who says, what purpose is any of this pomp and circumstance and the offering of incense and of animal sacrifice? I don't want any of it, says God. And you imagine the people for whom this is the way that they have always worshiped. This is the way that their fathers and their fathers and their fathers had worshiped. This is more or less the way that everybody around them worships, albeit to different gods. Hearing the prophet saying, what's the point of all of this? And perhaps having the first thought, we should throw a rock at that guy. Because how dare he ask the question, what's the purpose of all of this? Or to suggest that this might not be what God wants. Jeremiah goes on, thus says the Lord of hosts, God of Israel, add your burnt offerings to your sacrifices and eat the flesh. For in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I did not speak to your fathers or command them concerning burnt offerings and sacrifices. But this command I gave them, obey my voice and I will be your God and you shall be my people, and walk in the way that I command you, that it may be well with you. What's Jeremiah saying? Jeremiah is saying, speaking for God, my original hope for this people was not that they would be a sacrificing people. I don't need their sacrifices. My original hope for this people was that they were going to be a loyal people, a moral people, a people in covenant with me. That was the original plan. And this whole sacrificial system that gets built up is in some way a compromise to the original plan. We were meant to just love each other. You were meant to just be my people and to follow and enact my vision in the world. And somehow we find ourselves in this system, this complex system of arcane ritual and bloody sacrifice. And how did we even get here? Again, something that would have blown the minds of the listener and probably inspired a great deal of anger at the challenging of such a sacred cow. The prophet knew that religion, this is back to Heschel, could distort what the Lord demanded of man. That priests themselves had committed perjury by bearing false witness, condoning violence, tolerating hatred, calling for ceremonies instead of bursting forth with wrath and indignation at cruelty, deceit, idolatry, and violence. To the people, religion was temple, priesthood, incense. This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, it says in Jeremiah. Such piety Jeremiah brands as fraud and illusion. Behold, you trust in deceptive words to no avail, he calls. Worship preceded or followed by evil acts becomes an absurdity. The holy place is doomed when people indulge in unholy deeds. This is the core of the critique of religion, which is that people think religion is one thing, but Heschel is saying the prophets teach us it's really something else. The people think that religion is temple, priesthood, and incense. We could fill that in with Shul, Shabbos, and Kashrut. But ultimately, that can be, if that's not leading to a certain set of actions and way of being in the world, it becomes itself another idol. Let me read the passage from Jeremiah and then let's talk about it. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, burn incense to Baal, and go after other gods that you have not known, and then come stand before me in this house which is called by my name and say, we are delivered, only to go on doing all these abominations? Has this house which has been called by my name become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I myself have seen it, says the Lord. Go now to my place that was in Shiloh, where I made my name to dwell at first, and see what I did to it for the wickedness of my people Israel. So before there was a temple, there was a sacrificial site at Shiloh. This was the place where Samuel came from, Samuel, who was the prophet who would then go on to appoint Saul and later David. And this was part of the northern kingdom, which was destroyed. So go look at the old sanctuary and see that it's gone. And now, because you have done all these things, says the Lord, when I spoke to you persistently, you did not listen. And when I called to you, you did not answer. Therefore, I'll do to the house which is called by my name and in which you trust, and to the place which I gave to you and your fathers, as I did to Shiloh. And I will cast you out of my sight as I cast out all your kinsmen, all the offspring of Ephraim. Jeremiah is in this time prophesying against the southern kingdom, against the kingdom of Judah, and saying the same thing will happen to Judah as happened to the northern kingdom of Israel. It was conquered. The northern kingdom was conquered by the Assyrians. It was conquered by the enemies. Why was it allowed to be conquered? It was allowed to be conquered because it did not represent truthfully the moral and religious principles that it was meant to uphold, says Jeremiah, that it was destroyed for its wickedness. And the same thing could happen here, that religion, when it is being practiced in a way which is hypocritical, will ultimately bring about religion's downfall. Let's talk about that idea. What has been your experience with religion at its best and at its most challenging? What has been your experience or observation about when religion is living up to its highest calling and moral message, and when religion, please don't name any names, when religion has failed to do those things? What have you observed? Is this just a problem of the 6th century? I don't think so. Yeah, please, Luciana.
Well, from my experience, The best has been when religion is driving service and support for those more vulnerable, for many walking the talk, because there's a lot of talk for many religions. And when I see that that work is being done, and that very important, I think is priority for, should be for anybody. It happens, that's the best of it. The worst of it, I think, we've talked some about it, is when religion becomes so tied up in kind of strict rules or views and becomes about us versus them, which is fundamentally the opposite what it should be. So creating some values and standards and literal interpretations that then lead to being completely the opposite what it says it's supposed to be about.
Religion at its best is the most powerful unifying force ever offered to humanity. Here's a idea that we can put something bigger than us at our center. We can escape the fundamental narcissism of being a human being and being trapped in the service of our own ego, and make ourselves instead accountable to something bigger, holier, more noble than ourselves. And then we can take that sense of accountability and decentering the ego and very quickly turn it into just another tool of the ego used to differentiate ourselves from each other, and then used, of course, to degrade each other. That very same path, which is supposed to be the way to get ourselves out of the ego trap, can become yet another tool in its service. Yeah, Mimi, you wrote about, I'd love for you to share a little bit about this conversation you had with my teacher, Rabbi Dorf, about ill-gotten fortunes and wonderful causes. Can you elucidate a little bit more?
Rabbi Dorf came to CBI. It was many years ago, and we were in the little sanctuary, and speaking about there were large donations that had been made throughout the world, probably, but made by people, companies who had improperly earned the monies that they were donating. And then the ethical question became, should the organizations accept that money? Or they had it and then they found out, and then should they give it back? So that was a big part of the discussion. That was many years ago, like 20.
But an issue which remains fully alive, right? How what are our standards for how we financially support these institutions that are supposed to be institutions that are dedicated to doing good in the world, and what are the standards, if any, for what kind of gifts we accept? That's an interesting question. I'm going to assume that, Howard, these are Dylan lyrics. They're always Dylan lyrics. If you want to tell us some more about that, but in the meantime, Diane, with the big smile.
I'm just smiling at seeing the Dylan lyrics, but my greatest frustration is when I hear people trying to espouse any form of hate in the name of religion. I mean, there's not one religion that doesn't say love thy neighbor, and yet I know everybody here is experiencing the frustration of different forms of hate towards different groups, and in the name of whatever religion you want to put. And it's just something that's just so flies in the face of what we know religion is for, which is to promote love.
Oh. The challenge, of course, is that religion gives itself to us in packages that include virtually everything. One can find very good textual support for smash your enemies in the text of every tradition. One can find very good textual support for build a society rooted in love and goodness. And maybe it means that if religion is going to be this powerful, this potentially healing, and also this potentially destructive, do not operate like heavy machinery under the influence of any intoxicant or bad ideology, right? Like this is a dangerous tool, a powerful tool that can be used in so very many ways because religion does supply with it both really, really wonderful and uplifting things and also some more damaging things. It is a mixed bag. That's for sure. That is for sure. So how do we do that? How do we do that? How do we avoid the pitfalls, the potential traps of prioritizing the wrong things in our religious lives, in using religion as a tool of the ego rather than a method of getting beyond ourselves? How do we approach religion with this sort of iconoclastic eyes that our religion was, at least according to legend, born in, and that the prophets seem to exemplify? How do we do that? Svara first. You're going to have to clarify some Aramaic here. Prioritize personal ethical judgment, right? Svara is a concept from the Talmud, the idea that says essentially, use your common sense when approaching a text, that common sense is a tool. Reasoned insight is a tool in interpreting our texts. And we need to be willing to utilize that God-given capacity to think and reason and make conscience-based decisions and not read our texts blindly. Read them with awareness. Michelle, you had a hand and then put down a hand.
I mean, I didn't mean to, but I was thinking about confirmation bias, and when you said you can find the ideologies in which you glob onto, which resonate with you. And I was thinking, we've been talking about this for millennium, I don't know the right word, how to say that, but forever. And I feel I didn't want to be a Debbie Downer, so I didn't want to say anything, but it just feels like the struggle continues and will continue. And I think it's great to have conversations, but as far as the larger question of how do we allow our egos to be suppressed and our gracious and gratitude to be elevated, I don't know if religion's the answer. I don't know. Community is the answer. I don't know if a common religion has to be the answer. I don't know. So that's why I was thinking that and lowered my hand because I'm like, you can't say this in a religious. So thank you for allowing me to say that, but that's my truth. I just don't know. It's just so intense.
This is clearly a long-standing problem. How do we know it's a long-standing problem? Because we're reading a text from 2,500 years ago that we can look at and nod our heads and say, yep, we have that kind of religion still. It turned out Jeremiah didn't solve it. It turned out that in every generation, we need to keep going back and critiquing the same system again. And so maybe the answer is insanity is keeping doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. We keep coming back to this religion thing, and we haven't gotten it right in all of these thousands of years. It's time to chuck it. Or maybe religion is so baked into what it is to be human that since we can't live without some kind of communal organizing principle, some kind of shared values, since it seems to be something that everybody everywhere over the course of history forms groups of belief, then we just have to keep reckoning with generation after generation, knowing we're never going to fully get it right. But part of being human, perhaps, is just needing to keep doing this work. As how can we do otherwise? I don't know. Nothing's off limits. Certainly in a class on the prophets, nothing is off limits. Joseph, then Howard.
The issue that you're raising is, as you pointed out, sort of an eternal one. And it's on an individual level, it's on a communal level. As for my personal opinion about it, or what I try to do, and to the extent I have any influence over the Jewish community, I would seek to also do, is to focus our religious endeavors on adding goodness and light to the world. That's it. As much as you can, as often as you can. And that's the whole measure. And de-emphasizing focus on judging other people for their compliance with our tradition, de-emphasizing who's in the group and who's out of the group, and recognizing that because every person is endowed with divinity, every person deserves respect and compassion without equivocation or compromise. So those are the basic principles that I personally subscribe to in trying to make the balance. I try to.
Thank you. Well said. Howard, then Arlene.
One solution is to have a religion that every so often has iconoclasm built into it, which is what we have, if you think about it, right?
Mm.
Part of that tradition is it's kind of like Thomas Jefferson and Mao Zedong both said and did subscribe to the theory that there should be a revolution every so often. That without it, government will turn into exactly what's being talked about. And the same thing might be true of religion. Now, there are a lot of people that don't believe that. And then the other aspect of this, I'm not saying it's good, but it's just a theory. And then there's another theory that says one of the things that's true in nature generally among living creatures is their safety in numbers, right? One-celled organisms join up to become multi-cell, and we get that. And then when we have separate organisms that have brains of their own, they flock together, they swim in schools, they form tribes. It's very rare that solitary creatures are successful in the environment, in most environments, right? And maybe we have a tendency to just follow a herd because that's so deeply built into evolution, and it takes a tremendous almost a mutation to get somebody out there and be an iconoclast and be a prophet. And so that's why there are mutations, so that we don't all be lemmings and walk off the edge of the cliff.
I think there's so many beautiful and important things in what you just said, right? This idea that what is the function of these iconoclastic voices? It's to to never allow things to ossify permanently. That when things start to get too rigid, it's time to burn down the temple, I guess. It's time to have things shaken up, and that's rarely pleasant. But the risk is that if things never get shaken up, if they never change, people forget that they have the capacity to. And we get into that state of adaptation, of going with the flow that the prophets say is so deadly. And we stop noticing. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Arlene, please.
I wanted to say thank you to Michelle for kind of giving voice to this. I leave these sessions every week and wonder, how do Bible-based religions, how could we be where we are with so many people professing to be religious, and how can we be where we are today with where people are filled with animosity and hate and elevating religious ideas that aren't really based in humanity? Like, how could we be here if people have studied these texts for all these years? Really, aren't we informed individuals? Like, how do people make these choices? So I appreciate you saying that. I felt like it gave me some space to say, wow, how are we here? If people have studied the Bible for all this time, how the heck could we be here? That's it.
It's so frustrating being a human. we keep falling in the same damn hole over and over and over again. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Luciana and then Diane, please.
There's a lot of important, beautiful things that have been shared, but I wanted to raise a couple. One is this session today get me thinking of something that I think a lot about in the context when I was a scholar, but also in what the United States meant for me when I was growing up in Brazil. And it was never about what it is, it's what it aspires to be. And, having grown up in a country in a mid-carrier dictatorship that was influenced by the United States, I am very clear about what it does, what it is, what it has done, the problems, but it was all about the values and as a beacon or something that we can aspire to be. So in the context of religion is really hard because we all have different ideas of even what religion is, right? It was raised here on the chat. But also what it means to do good. How much good do we need to do? All these things are contested. So it's about the aspiration of getting to that sense of we want to do good. That's our mission here. That's what it means to be human. And if all pursue that path, we will be moving towards that goal that could be a beacon. So I'll conclude by saying that it's particularly hurtful to me seeing our vice president use Catholic doctrine and completely twisted to make an argument that we should prioritize those close to us, keep resources and privileges, and the last should be the people far away from us or those that it was really hurtful. And I think that because of this difficulty in having a common sense of what we should be doing, I think we have to recognize that we're mainly tribal as in our evolution, that we also have to think about mechanisms. It's not that easy to say, let's do this good work without having in mind that we also need to do the work of how do we do this. And I can give an example and I'll leave. Like here, I grew up in a country that's fundamentally racist. The messages about that are everywhere, growing up, images. So for me now, as a middle-aged woman, I work all the time if I see that I have these kinds of thoughts or things coming up, I consistently try to do things that undermine that. So I think for all of us, it's also this conscious effort to pursue that, beacon and that goal, but also recognize that as human beings, we're just, tribal. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.
Constant work, constant work, constant work to live up to the best in ourselves, constant work to be responsive to the moral invitations and challenges that are being offered here. And, if I had to pick a favorite line in all of Jewish text, it's the line from Pirkei Avot, from the collection of Rabbi's favorite sayings, "B'makom she'en anashim hishtadel lihyot ish," which is, in a place where there's no humanity, strive to be a human being. And the word that's doing the most work in that sentence for me is hishtadel, is it's all about striving. It's not about be a human being. The expectation is not that you're going to get there. The expectation is that you're going to work like hell to try to live up to a standard that is always going to be like the horizon receding in front of you, but that's worth continuing sailing towards. And religion can either be this incredible way of motivating us to do that work and giving us people to do that work with, or it can distract us from that work by telling us that we can assuage our conscience by simply doing a set of predetermined actions. Not that those rituals are bad. Heschel is not a critic of ritual, neither are the prophets, but rather that the rituals aren't ends in themselves. The rituals are means to moral ends. And so for that, I want to just bring us to very quickly, in the last minute we have, a text that many of us have seen before, which is the Haftorah, the prophetic reading for Yom Kippur. This comes from the book of Isaiah. And so interesting that the rabbis choose for us to read this reading specifically midway through the Day of Atonement, the day that is the day most laden with ritual. Shout it aloud, do not hold back, raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion and the descendants of Jacob their sin. For day after day they seek me out and seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God. Why have they fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the fast I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed, for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to Adonai? Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and to not turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and then your healing will quickly appear. This is the prophetic selection for the day in which we are meant to spend it in ritual, in self-denial, in turning inward, and the choice of a prophetic reading that says essentially, Not don't fast on Yom Kippur, but rather, if you think that all you need to do is to check the ritual boxes, you've misunderstood what religion is for. Religion is not for inviting you to check the boxes and then get enough points to get into heaven. Religion is a system of tools and practices, I don't want to say perfected, but experimented with over the millennia, that's meant in its very best to call us to the best of ourselves. And if we lose sight of what religion is for, if we lose sight of what the religion is a means to an end for, then we treat religion as an idol. It becomes itself an icon, a sacred cow, a thing which is untouchable. And if our tradition began with an idol smasher and was articulated by prophets who are iconoclasts and reaffirmed through multiple periods of revolution and reinvention over the course of our history, by iconoclasts and by people who were prepared to think differently about what Judaism ought to look like in the world. If we stay awake to that, then we can use religion in the way that these texts are suggesting God is asking for, which is to treat religion as a tool in the toolkit to try to build the kind of world that we want to build. And that requires staying maladjusted like the prophets, so the world as it is, and keeping our eye on the world as it could be. So I thank you for this session, for being a community to learn with, and look forward to continuing on. Take good care.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.